Welcome back to Mental Health Matters with Dr. Scott Terry, and I am Dr. Scott Terry. I am a marriage and family therapist, which is pertinent to our discussion today about 50 Shades of Grey and pornography. I've taught this subject, I've taught it to other therapists for years, and it's an interesting exploration. Today we have the whole group with us today, the whole round table, including Dwayne, who's going to join in. So, Sally, introduce yourself.
I'm Sally Hare, and I'm a mother and writer, activist, artist. That's me.
I'm Rob Hubler. I am not Dr. Scott Terry. And I'm glad to be here.
Andrew Perry. I don't know.
Oh, Andrew.
Yep. I live in Fairfield.
And I'm Dwayne Jones, assistant station manager here at Crew FM.
All right. But
Dwayne keeps it going.
But we all have different perspectives on the topic, which is what I think is interesting, given our past. So it doesn't really matter if Rob's perspective, for instance, comes because he was in the clergy, or if it's just who he is. But it's an interesting way to inform and look at this issue. So, Sally, you had some interesting perspectives. Why don't you get us rolling on the topic, 50 Shades of Grey and pornography, and why this is such a fascinating issue, especially relevant to today, because the movie just came out.
Well, first of all, my birthday is Valentine's Day.
Hey, happy
And-
birthday.
This movie came out as one of the big Valentine movies.
Okay.
And I chose not to see the movie and posted something on my Facebook that instead of 50 Shades of Grey, why don't you give $50 to a women's shelter? Part of my complaint or concern about 50 Shades of Grey has to do with the dehumanization of women. And I have not read the book, but I have read a synopsis of the book on Wikipedia, which has a very good explanation of what's there. And I don't think it's something I choose to pollute my mind with.
One perspective.
I feel that it displays women, or subjects women to objectification and dehumanizing relationship, and it's not really romantic. I don't think it's romantic to think of women as objects and submissive to men and power. This man is a billionaire, and she is taught to be a submissive. And
So give us the synopsis in 2 seconds. And Dwayne has actually read the books, so I'm really interested to hear Dwayne's perspective, but finish.
there's
what
there's
you're really
abuse,
objecting
there's
to.
physical abuse, there's a lot of that love. The overall idea is that he does fall in love with her, but she has to, be completely submissive and beaten by him and all kinds of stuff. And then, oh, wow, she gets the man in the end because she gets the rich guy. So there's a whole bunch of messages of inequality and...
Okay, so we have a two-tiers thing.
Yeah.
She's not rich. She
Yeah, right.
is what
working
does she,
for him.
She works for him, and he's a billionaire.
Yeah.
So that same old story we've heard a million times: rich guy falls for the poor woman, kind of thing.
If I'm correct, the guy's name is Gray, right?
Yeah.
And the name of the business that he runs is the Gray Business or something.
Enterprises.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's where the 50 Shades of Grey come in.
I see. But it's also a metaphor for
He as an individual has 50 different shades, I think, is what, everybody has 50 different shades of things.
Interesting perspective. Okay, Dwayne, you actually read the book. What is your perspective on this? And is Sally a bit off in terms of her needing to thinking that women are objectified and this is destructive?
Maybe Sally might have a different point of view rather than being off, but go ahead.
Well,
Yes, absolutely.
I wouldn't say anything's wrong with Sally. Surely she's entitled to her own opinion. But what I would say is I took it as a form of entertainment, to arouse your imagination, to expand your mind. I didn't take it personal. I didn't take it as women being downgraded. Surely I would think if a woman was in that situation and had the option to opt out, I just can't see anybody truly falling for it. I mean, like I said, I just looked at it as a form of entertainment.
That's a contemporary view. I agree, and I go to a group in some city, someplace with some people.
Nice description.
And in that group, the other night we met, and this was the topic of the whole 2-hour discussion. And one of the themes that came up, kind of maybe what you were talking about, Dwayne, is that said, well, she always has a choice. You can always make a choice. You can either make a choice to be in or to be out. And my response to that, and like you said, Dwayne, we all can have different points of view. My response to that is that, I said, welcome to the media-controlled capitalist society that we live in, because I look at 50 Shades of Grey as being probably a form of entertainment, but mostly a form of making money. And that we as a society, there's a lot of people with money out there that want to buy the books and want to go to that movie. And that's, and the dehumanizing, I agree 100% with. I agree that putting down, that pornography particularly, really most of it emphasizes submissiveness of women and dominance of men, and men need to be pleasured, and men have the power and all those things. So, but I think ultimately, what's at the bottom of this, and I preached a sermon on this once out in Nebraska with disastrous results on pornography, because the next day, that day, on Sunday, the Lincoln newspaper had an article where 45% of the men in Nebraska tuned into pornography one way or another once a week. And so half of the people I was talking to in my congregation, men anyway, had tuned in, and it was a really bad couple weeks for me. People did not like me talking about that subject, but overall.
So what was your topic in terms of the subject? Because this is a topic that frequently comes up when I do couples counseling, is dealing with pornography, and men and women have very, very different perspectives on the usefulness or destructiveness or the entertainment value versus the addictive quality, because it really does stimulate the brain in a certain way, like cocaine does, and you could really get trapped in your brain. And so there really is a distinction of, can something like pornography be destructive, or at times, as I've told couples, the research shows that it could actually be useful, but it's useful if it's consensual, if it's both people watching together to have mutual stimulation to then want to connect to each other. But if it's off, like I hate the analogy, but I'm going off to drink by myself and I am now lost in myself, it really does change the brain patterns. There's lots of research on this, that then it becomes difficult to then be with my partner or to think of my partner in a certain way. Rob, you talk so correctly about the media-driven world that we're in. So I always talk about things not being right or wrong, good or bad. My perspective is what works and what doesn't work. Any tool could be good or bad depending on how it's utilized. Pornography can be positive if done in the right way, but 90% of the time it seems to not be. It seems to be destructive. It seems to be not just diminishing of females, but for a man, then I have to be that guy. I have to be in this movie the rich guy who's now dominating the person. How do I then be a human being? How do I have balance? How do I have sensitivity? How do I live as that guy?
I mean, let me interrupt.
No, please.
Or I already have. Correct me if I'm misinterpreting you, Scott, but what I heard you say is that the ends justify the means. And in terms of ends, you're listening to KRUU Radio, 100.1 FM on the radio dial in Fairfield, Iowa, solar powered. And if you would like to email us right now, you can by emailing
Mental Health Matters at kruufm.com. And we broadcast 6:30 at Tuesday nights. Rebroadcast Thursdays at 12:30. We are loving your emails. Please connect with us. We're not here to be right. We're here to spark discussion and thought in your brain so that you can have the discussion for yourself of what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
All right, back to what I was trying to say. That it seems like I hear you saying maybe the ends are justify the means, and in fact, for me, that's wrong. The ends have to be, or the means have to be as pure as the ends, which means getting to the end needs to be as least destructive and as most uplifting and as well as good as the end, so that if in fact pornography downplays women, puts them down, puts them in a powerless position, but the end result is a good relationship and a marriage for 50 years, that's just not. I don't think that's the way we ought to be looking at relationships. Relationships need to develop based upon the reason why I preached that sermon on pornography was the Saturday before we had a wedding. And at that wedding, the couple had written their own their own service, and it was not a Presbyterian service, and I did it. And there were a lot of people that came that were pretty upset about that because it was a service pretty much controlled by the man and woman that got married. They were young, and they wanted to have an equality marriage and everything equal, and they said that, and they even said, that I don't have to obey you and you don't have to obey me, but we're going to work this out together. And so that's what had precipitated the pornography thing the next day and everything. But the means and ends was part of the discussion the other day too. Whatever we have in the end needs to be as pure as the ends. That's Martin Luther King, by the way. I mean, that was his interpretation of the means and ends, and Gandhi's. So, just because it turns out that you're married for 50 years, you have a wonderful relationship, and you every Sunday afternoon you beat your wife with a stick down by the river or something. I mean, that doesn't mean a good relationship as far as I'm concerned.
I think you're absolutely right. But, there are so many nuances and different perspectives of this, and that's why it's so interesting for you to, within your head, to think about for yourself what works for you. For instance, I had a couple once, and she was a former stripper. And she was a successful woman now. She thought of her time being a stripper. I don't know if that's the correct term or not. Thought of it in the most positive tone possible. She saw herself as a manipulator of men, and that she was completely empowered at all times. She didn't feel denigrated. She felt empowered by what she was doing and feeling good within her body and what she could create. Again, but that's one person's perspective. I have had other clients who have said exactly the opposite. But I think you're right, Rob. It's not just the ends matter, because in that end, that couple that's been married for 50 years, but the wife's getting beaten, is that actually a good relationship? Some people might say yes, but is that yes because that person, let's say the wife, isn't educated enough to know what's greater possibility of her having an equal partnership, a truly equal partnership, where there's true connection?
I feel that
Step up there.
as far as you speaking about the lady who was a stripper, women today sort of have control over sexual. Let me see. I'm trying to put this as clean as possible. But women have control over sexual indifferences or whatever. It's true. A woman should and can feel good about herself in that situation. The thing about what you were stating about porn between couples is both couples, both members have to have an equal share, and men seem to don't want to communicate about pornography as much as women do, and I think that's where the line is drawn on that subject. Men don't communicate, whereas in a relationship, say for instance, me and my wife, we talk about everything. We share our fantasies or whatever, so there is no, we're not uncomfortable with talking about that, or I don't sneak in the closet to look at a porn book or a movie, or it's not necessary. So it's really up to the couple to share those moments together. Let me see, to talk about those things.
One thing that strikes me about this conversation that I imagine this couple is having is that one of the complaints might be of the man watching or porn, and that's denigrating to women, but it seems like the conflict in the relationship is really about a request that the woman is making. It's really obedience again, and this is what I find is interesting, is rather than like getting into the details, look at the broader strokes, the style of thinking that's underneath. It's like, in this situation, it's probably woman is like, hey, I asked you not to do that. Why are you doing this thing that I don't want you to do? So again, it's like this kind of like submissive obedience play. And so that's something I would like to examine, is just let's deconstruct to like when we're doing this all the time, actually. Let's just identify what's the general flavor or texture of this kind of like dominance sort of play, when that is what I call a relationship dynamic or an energetic dynamic between two people. To me, I've just learned to be suspicious of that whenever it comes up, regardless of like the topic. So that's just something that I would like to
so say more about that, because even in this movie, getting back to the notion of this movie, we don't just have the distinction of man and woman, we also have the distinction of class, socioeconomic status, and which is absolutely huge to this. I just heard an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg this morning, actually, of a rebroadcast, and it was fantastic. Looking at the notion of that she doesn't think, for instance, even if Roe versus Wade is repealed, which she doesn't believe it would be, that it's possible, but she doesn't believe it would be, that women of means still would be able to seek services if they needed them. It's really women without means that can't travel or fly around the world or do something to take care of themselves. A 16-year-old girl that's been raped, or some terrible situations of a woman being trapped in a bad relationship. And, we could talk about situation after situation, but the power in differentials make it so much more difficult. And so it's not just men and women. I think, you're right, it's way too simplistic. And I think it's not just about sexuality. It's really, again, about what works and what doesn't work. And when we're talking about power differentials, there's always an implicit it doesn't work. There's always, as a therapist, there's always a difference between me and the client. I'm always in a power position, which I need to be aware of. There's always a distinction. I've been a professor and a supervisor for many years, and there's a distinction between the two worlds. I'm always in a power differential, just like you are even when you see your doctor or your attorney or some other position of power and that you're needing services. You could be as friendly and as power as you can, but in that situation, there's a power differential which makes power imbalance, which leads to what you're talking about, Andrew, in terms of sociological issues, so prominent, which is why I'm loving your perspective. So say some more, but you are listening to KRUU FM, 100.1 FM, and listen to us, please. Email us, connect with us. Rob?
Yeah, this is the Mental Health Matters, and we're the round table, and we're discussing today 50 Shades of Grey. And an interesting, keep this conversation going, but also you mentioned earlier the two-tier. That I think is another topic that we keep bringing into it because it is the Ginsburg thing, the Ginsburg comment about when you repeal it, then you create a two-tier: the people who have money that can do it and the people who can't. I'm reading a book right now, a brand new book that entitled "When the Facts Change" by Tony Judt. Tony's he's died a couple years ago, but a writer for actually he was a communist all during the Cold War, and this book is almost exclusively, it's a set of essays, but almost exclusively is on the two-tier, about how in the United States we grant people, particularly Clinton's work ethic, in which he said that if everybody, President Clinton, if everybody works, then they can get food stamps and they can get other substances, but if you don't work, you can't. So what he essentially did was created a tier of you had to take any job that came along regardless of what the price was in order to get the benefits that everybody ought to, food, clothing, shelter, that everybody ought to be given. I mean, so that we set up in the United States, and Tony is from England, but you set up in the United States a two-tier in which if you have the money or if you do the right things, then you get the results of things that are basic necessities for people.
So I can dispute that for a second. Let's say I come from a conservative perspective. I might say what? What would a conservative perspective say? That do you really deserve those? Are those really basic rights? Do you really need that? There's right now in Congress, there are people talking about trying to repeal food stamps, to get rid of food stamps, to get rid of basic rights. Again, is this a basic right? Is health care a basic right? They want to appeal Obamacare, and that, for some people, is an abhorrent system.
Well, there's this assumption that everybody who needs food stamps is capable of working, and that's not true. Right. There are plenty of disabled people, there are plenty of elderly people, there are lots of children who need to be in school rather than working. And the whole idea that children should go to work, in the school and get paid some ridiculously small amount to earn their lunch. There are people who are so poor that they and are so disabled or so incapable of working. These people need to be have assistance. Or are we just going to be an incompassionate country?
So let's say we're an incompassionate country. Let's say our ideals in this country don't match the realities, and we're an incapacitated, and we have this two-tier system, almost like the caste system in India, and the haves get to have whatever they want. I mean, what is it they said by 2016? half of all the wealth in the world will be controlled by 1% of the world, of the population?
Well, in the U.S., it's something like half the wealth in the U.S. is controlled by something like 80 people.
Right. 80%.
Yes.
80 people.
Right.
80 people control half
and
the
so
wealth.
why
in
is
the
that?
US.
So let me be devil's advocate. And why is that inappropriate? Why is this two-tier system? We're talking about pornography.
It's theft, is why it's inappropriate.
There you go.
I mean, come on.
Okay, but if I had one of the fantasies is that I will be the 81st person, and so therefore
Yeah,
I
it's an unrealistic fantasy, and I want to take it back to 50 Shades of Grey because
absolutely.
if you look at the statistics, women they make less than men, they are much more subjected to violence than men. They are subjected to violence from men. 1 in 3 women in their lifetime is subjected to violence from
and the
men.
glass ceiling still does exist.
The glass ceiling exists.
Statistically,
in the
it's
Western
like
culture.
80%.
If you look at
It's still 80%
statistically
of
in
men.
the world, women are chattel in most of the world.
Okay.
So when a young woman in my life says to me, "Well, Mom, it's the culture. It's the culture. This S&M is the culture. It's part of the culture." I don't feel I need to accept that because I think accepting that as the culture is oppressive to women and sends a wrong message to women, to young women, as well as to young men, that this isn't an okay way to treat women. If this is all the messaging they're getting, that this is that we should aspire to be billionaires so we could be abusive towards women. I mean, come on.
Again, I have the perspective. I want to hear Andrew's thought on this because he's the best in terms of sociological perspective among us. But the thought is really, again, I could accept that it's wrong to be abusive to women, but I bring in this notion of what is it like to be that guy who's having to be abusive? Who am I? How do I live my life? I'm not. Without a real partner, without balance, without. Anyways, Andrew, what was your thoughts?
Well, 2 ideas struck me. One is I think that some of this conversation around the culture, maybe just educating people about what dominant and submissive energy actually is, because the fetish community that's very alive in many cities, it's a healthy thing, and even in all relationships, we constantly switch between more the energy is just, it flows, and there's kind of an initiator and a receiver, and it's playful. So I think that there's what we are having a conversation about isn't that, it's a very immature interpretation or practice of that. So I think taking it to a more developed and mature place, in which many of the people who practice that are doing it in that way, and so we're kind of like these immature people talking about something I don't think quite, there's a deeper practice there, I think, that we can respect, and if you are involved in that and doing that, that's a healthy and happy thing, if that's enjoyable to you. But I think, evolving the conversation to rather just an immature understanding of domination and submissiveness, and taking it to where it's actually just a healthy, energetic dynamic, and one that's consensual as well.
What would that look like? So again, I
have the second idea too,
please.
Which is, I think, going back to this idea of choice, and that this person always has the choice to opt out. That I just completed an NIH. It's a human research subject certification, so I can participate. And there's 3 core principles. This came out of I'm not sure, how much time do we have?
Not much.
15 seconds.
Actually, why don't we do it?
Maybe wrap that up with another
yeah, right.
session.
Let's do that. Let's do our next show. Let's wrap this up. And how much time do we have?
None. 15.
Okay. All right. I won't read what I was going to read.
Let's look it out for
this
the
is
next
KRUU Radio 100.1 FM on the dial, and you're listening to Mental Health Matters with Dr. Scott Terry. And tune in next week for section 2 of this conversation with the
roundtable.
Team. Yes.
The team. Thank you, team. Today, you guys are awesome. Bye.
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 Bye.